From KPRC2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
2 children whose bodies have been pulverized by bullets fired at them, decapitated, whose flesh had been ripped apart.
Schools are not safe anymore. Something needs to really change.
So today, we stand for Lexi.
A pediatrician and parents from Uvalde this week on Capitol Hill asking for changes to gun laws so that what happened in their community won't happen to anyone else. 3 weeks ago, when I last saw you, we were talking about the mass killings in Buffalo. Now the tragedy in Uvalde has our attention, with thoughts and prayers being offered, but not much else, even with 19 children and their teachers murdered. Congressman Al Green was in Washington last week as the House passed a bill designed to do something to change the dynamic. Good morning, Congressman. Good to see you. The Protecting Our Kids Act, I think, is the name of the bill that was passed there. It has a lot in it. I want to ask you about that. The problem is you only got 5 Republicans to go along with it, which kind of indicates toward the tracking of it. Doesn't have much of a future in the Senate. Talk about the good things that are in that bill that you like, and about some of the frustration that you have about how the bill is likely to be passed into law.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and permit me to just express my condolences and my sympathies. Those families are still suffering. 19 babies, in my opinion, they were babies that lost their lives and shouldn't have happened. But thoughts and prayers are not enough. I always extend them, but that's not enough. What we did to help those families that are grieving, to let them know that Congress can do something, is what's important. We passed a law that says you're going to have to be 21 if you're going to buy an assault type weapon, an AR-15 type weapon. Those weapons have lethality that certainly should not be on the streets at all, in my opinion. But if they are going to be on the streets, they ought to be in the hands of persons who are a bit more mature, and 21 years of age is at least a movement in the right direction. We also dealt with the high-capacity magazines. Right now, unlimited. Some of these magazines will have 30 rounds in them. Well, we've limited that to 15 rounds in this legislation. We also deal with the bump stocks. You might remember at the Mandalay Hotel out in Nevada, 60 people were murdered, slaughtered. Over 1,000 rounds fired in short order. That could have been prevented if he had not had that bump stock. That bump stock turned that semi-automatic into an automatic weapon, and all of those people lost their lives. Those are some of the things that are important. But there's something else that's important here too. We have to do more to make sure that people who get this level of lethality are licensed and they have some training. In Texas now, you don't have to have a license to acquire this level of lethality. You don't have to get training, and you ought to get some training, and at the point that you buy that gun, you ought to be at least given something that tells you how you can store it. You ought to be given something that tells you about the lethality of it. I'd prefer to see you get educated as opposed to just get information. But given that we don't have that, at least we should do something along that line.
Everything you said is common sense in a lot of different ways. Folks who say the Second Amendment is being challenged will tell you that you're really trying to encroach upon what they believe are their Second Amendment rights. Your comments?
Well, yes, I'm pleased that you asked that question. And please ask all of those tough questions because they're good answers. Here's a good answer. The Second Amendment is not absolute. Neither is the First. You can't scream fire in a theater. Well, here's what I say to people who say this. First of all, the Heller case did not allow for absolute right. What it says is this: you can have a gun, but it doesn't mean that you can't have some regulations. It also indicates to us that the regulations would include you're not having a grenade. You can't have a bazooka. We don't want you to have a switchblade drone. We don't want you to have lethality that belongs on the battlefield. And these AR-15 type weapons are among the things that belong on battlefields, not in the streets of our cities and in homes where people may use them viciously and violently.
I will tell our viewers we have a Newsmakers Extra today because we always have more to talk about than we have for our segment. So we're going to continue our conversation with that. But you know that this is not going anywhere. I mean, you have to know in your heart that what's going on in the Senate trying to solidify these, it doesn't look good to get a lot of what you talked about, what you think are common sense, into a bill that's going to actually pass.
Yeah, but we are going someplace. Here's where we're going. There's going to be an election in November. We need to know where everybody stands. We need to know where you are. Do you stand for allowing 18-year-olds to have AR-15 type weapons? We need to know. And if you do, people need to govern themselves accordingly. If you think that's okay, then you'll vote for people who want AR-15 type weapons. But most of the people in this country say that 18-year-olds shouldn't have that level of lethality. So yes, I agree that the Senate has been a place where bills can sometimes go to die. It took us a while to get the Affordable Care Act, but we got it. And we got it because we didn't give up. We can never give up on doing the right thing. And this is the right thing to do.
So we're going to continue to talk about that in our Newsmakers lecture. But for this segment, I want to touch on what happened this week in the public hearings and the findings surrounding the January 6th insurrection there. It started this week in prime time, and what they discovered, there was a lot that came out that we hadn't heard before. You had a chance to look at some of that. Were there any surprises? What were you thinking the most important that came out of that hearing?
Without question, reservation, or hesitation, the most important thing came out of that hearing will come from these notes that I made. And it has to do with Ms. Edwards, Officer Edwards, and her testimony. That testimony was so powerful. If you listen to her, you have to believe that this was an effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Here's what she said. She said she was pepper sprayed, tear gassed, hit over the head, and became unconscious. That she was in what she thought was a war zone. She was slipping on the blood of people. People around her bleeding, and she's slipping on their blood. That it was chaos. She said it was hand-to-hand combat. That she wasn't trained for that. And she suffered a brain injury. My dear friends, this lady was the real hero. She and those officers who were trying to hold back that mob, that violent mob.
What do you think is going to come out of this? What do you hope will come out of the hearings? Is it just to make sure that the former president is held accountable, or is it to make sure that something like this, the attempt to stop the power of our Constitution, that make sure that that never happens again?
Everybody has to be held accountable for this, who engaged in this process and who were a part of this violent mob coming to Washington, D.C. to prevent the peaceful transfer of power with the chant, "Hang Trump." And as long as Pence, pardon me, yes, Pence. And as long as I live, I won't forget this. They continue to show this picture of the noose from the gallows and the Capitol dome in the back. Now, as a black man who's been threatened with lynching, that really strikes at the core of my being. But they were there to thwart the peaceful transfer of power. And this is the first time in the history of the country it was ever done. There must be accountability. And this is the final thing I want to say about this one, because this is really important. I'm a liberated Democrat, so I can say this. Most people can't say what I'm about to say. If those people had been black that were behaving that way, we would have had different results. So we can't have this standard of allowing people of a certain hue to do things that we know are unconstitutional and do it with impunity.
Well, you never hold back when you're on this program. That's what I appreciate about you, Mr. Liberated Democrat.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate your feedback here. We're going to continue our conversation on Newsmakers Extra. Thank you for that.